Hey there guys, today we're going to learn a little bit about rigid body dynamics within Maya. It is an effect that basically simulates real world physics so that you can have objects physically fall with gravity, collide with each other, and in the end we're going to actually build a catapult inside of Maya. Now this little tutorial that's provided basically talks us through how to make and work with rigid body dynamics in Maya. So let me go first to Maya and just show you the basic interface. So when you get to Maya like this, again, remember, first thing we do is OK. You can stretch out your timeline. Now, it by default here has 200 frames. You might extend that for a little bit more time, mostly because with the catapult, you want time to simulate. So you need time for gravity to kick in and the simulation to begin. So maybe I'll just start with 300 frames down here in the timeline. And also double check your little running man in the far right corner to make sure that you're at 24 frames per second. And your playback speed is set to play every frame. That is not real time. Real time would be 24 frames times 1. That would be real time. But we choose play every frame just because inside Maya, depending on your machine, depending on how much RAM you have, usually there's a bit of a lag because of the simulation. So playing every frame gives you a much more accurate simulation, if not real time. If we tried to play every frame or 24 times 1, you'll usually get some lag, or you'll get some skipping of frames, and you'll get an error at the bottom that says not playing real time. So we just choose every frame to give us a better result. Just like everything in Maya, of course, the first thing you want to do is set your project. Now, I don't have a project yet, so we go to Project Window, New, and I'm going to call this, of course, the Catapult, because that's what we're eventually going to build here, Catapult_project, and give it a folder location. In this case, I'm just going to go to a folder on my desktop. Let's just find one here. And I'll find the appropriate course. And of course, this is the catapult, so I'll just put the project in here, select it. And what this is going to do is going to create a project folder. And we do this because it's going to create all these folders that the simulation needs. So it needs a scene file, it needs image files for if we render it, it needs a movie file in case we do a Playblast. You get a folder here for your textures, your sounds, everything. And that just makes sure that, because it's a project folder, it knows where to save everything when we actually create stuff, especially because of the simulation that's going on here with the simulation of the Dynamics server. Plus, it gives us a folder. If you don't create set project, oftentimes Maya will by default go to your My Documents folder for Maya, and you tend to lose things that way. So just set project, and that of course means that when you save it, it can work. So just starting with these rigid bodies, just to play with them now, you can see we can create what's called a passive rigid floor. There's actually two types of categories for these rigid body dynamics. You have active and you have passive. So first, let's just make a floor, and I'll just make the ground plane, and I'll scale up the size of my little grid here, just like that. And I'm actually going to activate my wireframe on shaded just so we have that. I can even turn off the grid right now. So we have just a ground plane, nothing fancy about it. And what we can do then is to work with effects. Go to the effects menu set, upper left, and you see we have things here now for fields and solvers. And if you look down here, we've got some constraints, we've got some rigid body characters here, and you can see here under the legacy rigid bodies, we're working with the legacies here, we can create an active or a passive rigid body. In this case, the floor is going to be passive, meaning it doesn't get affected by any fields, gravity, air, drag, radial, turbulence, anything. It's simply activated as a passive, non-moving body. So we create a passive rigid body. And you see by doing that passive rigid body, here in the attribute editor, it's currently not active. Now, if I want to make it active, I can simply just check that button, and now it's an active rigid body. And you also see with these rigid bodies, we've got real-world physics, such as friction, static friction, dynamic friction, bounciness. We'll adjust those to basically act as the material. So naturally, if it's going to be something that's a rigid passive body that might be, let's say, wood, it would have more bounciness than, say, maybe something that absorbs some collision of some type that would have no bounciness, so it would actually stick to it, like the ground or something like that. Now that we've done that, let's just create, let's come back here, NURBS or polygon surface will work, scale it for size, we can name it floor, and then we choose soft rigid bodies. These are in the legacy rigid bodies and passive rigid body option box, and then we can figure out the friction or just use the defaults, which is what I'm doing. Next, we can create an active rigid body, and here we're just going to make a sphere or some sort of a polygon or a NURB sphere, scale it to size, name the ball, and we're going to actually designate that as an active rigid body. So let's just do that. So here's a sphere. I'm just going to use a polygon. You don't have to use NURBs. I'm going to move this up here. Maybe I'll scale it up just a little bit, like so. All right, so this now, we're going to go to Field Solvers, and we're going to create an active legacy rigid body, active rigid body, okay? And now you see here in the rigid bodies, it is active. It's got mass. We can control mass, friction, bouncing, dampness, impulse, impulse position, spin impulse. These are basically ways to make it move, premeditatively move without necessarily friction. So again, if you want to make a ball look like it's being, you know, shot down a bowling alley, you can give it impulse positions to move in a direction or rotate in a direction. So you can almost make it almost like if you want to make a car tire, you can give it spin impulse so it automatically spins, and you can even key these factors on or off. Now, if I hit rewind and hit play, you're going to notice nothing happens. That is because we have the active rigid body ball, we have the passive rigid body floor, but there's no forces, there's no fields. So simply by selecting the ball and choosing gravity, we've now added a gravity field, and we can put this just about anywhere. It really doesn't matter. I'll just move it over here out of the way. Because you see the gravity has a magnitude by default of 9.8 in a negative y direction, which is basically the default real-world physics that's built into Maya. So now if I hit rewind and play, you're going to see the ball is going to fall and collide with the floor. Now, hit rewind again, and I can start to come up with things like, let's add more mass. Let's add more bounciness. And hit play, and you can see now, I can control a little bit more of what is going on with this active ball. You see it's actually bouncing off the floor. See that? If I want to add a little bit more randomness to it, let's just add a little field of a little turbulence. And now when I hit rewind and hit the ball, let's move turbulence up out of the way even. And turbulence is just a random force. It just is a collection of random force. Let's move turbulence up here, which is going to affect our ball. Now you'll see, let's actually increase the magnitude of our turbulence. And you're going to start to see the ball act and behave a little bit different. Let's give it a little rotation. Maybe move it up in the air a little bit more. And hit rewind and hit play. Okay? Again, we can select the floor. Let's hit pause. Let's add a little bit of bounciness to the floor, maybe a little static friction or dynamic friction. And you're going to see it behaves more and more different every time. In fact, now our ball is actually rotating a little bit, see? Because it's just behaving a little bit different every time. Let's go ahead and add another little object here. I'll just put this little cube, I'll put it slightly below. And another way to designate something is dynamic is actually, since we've already created a turbulence and a gravity to this, another way we can simply do is just plug this in. So I can go to Windows, Relationship Editors, Dynamic Relationships, and here in this pop-up you can see I've got the cube selected. I can simply add the gravity and the turbulence to that cube by simply activating it there in the dynamic relationship. So again, I actually, just by adding turbulence and gravity to this, it automatically knows now to be a rigid body, see? So I don't have to actually designate something as a rigid body. Let me show you again. All I need to do is give it the relationship and the dynamic is simply to activate gravity, and it becomes an active rigid body. So again, let's go to Relationship Editors, Dynamic Relationships, and let's just turn on gravity and turbulence on this little cone. So we can then hit play, and you see these objects are now interacting with each other. If you don't want something to be bouncy, let's say, like let's take the bounciness down to 0 and increase static friction to this cube, it will literally stick to the ground, see, as if it's got more weight and less, because I've turned off the bounciness and I've turned on the static friction. See here, if I come here, turn bounciness down and add friction, I can actually get this to kind of land like it's got more weight. See, so it's a heavier object. And now you can see these objects are even colliding with each other. Now, what happens if we want to duplicate something? Okay, so I can, let's make this ball, and I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to go duplicate, so I have a second ball here. Now, the problem is, watch when I hit rewind and play, you'll notice duplicates do not gain, they don't, when you duplicate something, it doesn't include it into the it doesn't get the gravity, it doesn't behave. So you can't simply just duplicate something that's already body. However, if I just go to, again, relationship editors, dynamic relationships, I can activate those, that copy, and notice again, it doesn't work. And that is because you can't duplicate a rigid body. If you go and duplicate something, you literally need to edit, delete by type, rigid body, to get it back to being just a primitive again. And then you can go to your window relationship editor and activate it back on. So again, if you duplicate a rigid body and you want it to behave, see, now it behaves like it's properly supposed to. So just a quick tip, you can't duplicate rigid bodies. If you do duplicate, it's not going to work. If you try to add gravity to it, it's not going to work. You need to go back to your edit, delete by type, the rigid body that was originally on the duplicate, and then you can reactivate it. Okay? So kind of add gravity to the ball, you see all that happening in that little let message. Now, let's build a catapult. Okay? So to build the catapult, we're going to keep it pretty simple, and again, we'll try to follow our tutorial best we can. Okay, so I'm going to get back to normal. Let me reactivate my grid. Okay, and I tend to like everything, you know, with the x-axis pointing, you know, left, right. So to build this catapult, let's go to our tutorial here. Okay, build from some basic, again, we could do NURBS or we can do Polygon. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a basic catapult complete with an arm, a basket, and a pivot, a lever. And we can do that with a cube, a cylinder, and a sphere for the basket. Okay, so you can see here, cylinder can be NURBS, polygons, anything. We're going to put it on a little axle pivot, and we're going to then take a half sphere, and we're going to have to do some things with that sphere to get it to work properly. So first thing I'm going to do here, just like I did before, is I'm going to build just a little platform. Doesn't have to be big, just to act as the floor. Okay, and I could even come here and call it floor. Next thing I'm going to do is create a cylinder. Doesn't have to be that fancy. Let's go ahead and Control A to get in our channel, which will allow us now to get the proper rotation settings. So let's make this exactly 90. Let's make sure that it is upright on our cylinder, and we'll move this all later at a later time once we actually group it together. Go ahead and give ourselves another cube. This is going to be our board. Think of like a teeter-totter. Once I actually get it to scale and I get it the way I kind of like it, I could come here and make adjustments to my basic polygon. Let's give it 2 by 2. Maybe 3 there. And I'm going to put it on a pivot like so. Let's actually make this just be a little bit larger. This little pivot here. Just like so. And next we're going to need a Polygon Sphere or a NURBS sphere, but we're going to need to have it cut in half. So let's go ahead and just bring this up. I'll scale it up just a little. And this is basically like going to act as what's called a catch cup. Problem is, it's hit my space bar to get my 4-panel space bar. Come here to I can see this on the side, and I'm going to right click, choose the face, select half the sphere, and simply delete it. So you see we now have a half cup. And to get back to object mode, I can right click, or I can hit F8 to get in and out of that. And let's move our catch cup this way. And what we're going to do now is we're going to simply parent these. So I'm going to take the catch cup, hold shift, hold my board, go to edit, and parent it, which is a shortcut of a P. And I'm going to take my board, hold shift, select my pivot, my lever, and hit P for parent, so that now when I select this, you see everything's actually parented to it. It's going to work this way because when it comes to actually tossing this, you can see I can just animate this movement to get the cup and the catapult to throw. Okay? Now, come back to my perspective view so I can move this all the way into the back, like so. So you can see we've got our catapult ready to go and throw. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, actually, I'll hold off on the wall here. Let's work on the actual process of throwing a ball. Okay, so I'm just going to make another sphere. Move it here, move it back, okay, and I'm going to put it just above our catch cup. So what we've created again is a floor, pivot or a lever, the board, the catch cup, which is cut in half, and the projectile, the sphere. Now, to make this all work now, what we need to do, like I just showed you earlier, is we need to designate an active and a rigid, or an active rigid body and a passive rigid body. Now, we already know floor, right? Floor needs to be, fields and solvers, a passive rigid body. The cup needs to be an active rigid body. Now, another way to do this, though, remember, rather than making it just active, the cup needs to be passive as well. Let's make it a passive rigid body. Okay? But the projectile, right? I'll call this projectile. This needs to be turned into an active rigid body. But remember, we can do that very easily by just turning on gravity. And I'll move gravity up out of the way so it's not lost in the plane. So when I hit rewind and hit play now, you're going to see that the ball lands in the cup. The problem with this, though, is that the cup, if we look at the cup, let me zoom in, you'll notice that it's black on the inside. And that is because the normals, or the positive side, remember, we're dealing with normals, so collisions are affected by positive side of geometry. So if I go to the display here, polygons and normals, face normals, you're going to see that our catch cup has green hairs sticking outward, but not inward. What this represents is that the normals are backwards because it was originally a positive sphere. But I want the collision to happen on the inside of this cup. And in order to get that to work, we need to reverse the normals on this cup. So let me go back to modeling really quick. Let's go to mesh display and hit reverse. And suddenly you notice, right, the outside of the cup is black, but the inside of the cup is gray, and the hairs for the normals are facing inward. Okay, so now I can actually display and turn off those face normals because now we've got the cup positive on the inside, not the outside. Okay? So I hit play, and now you see. Now I can come here, Control A, go to my rigid body. I can add a little bit more bounciness, a little less friction. I can go to my catch cup, and I can play around with its bounciness, some of its friction, just to kind of make a little bit more unusual. See, now you notice what happened there. Watch when I hit rewind. This is something that happens. Let me hit play. Watch how these two turn green and white. See that? And I get an error. What it's doing is it's penetrating through the cup. See that? And that's going to get stuck. It's very similar to what you see when you play video games and your character gets stuck in a wall. It's because the collidables, the collision distance, is too minimal. Okay? So to correct that, you got to remember, things collide for reasons. And you can see I have a collision tolerance on the sphere and on the cup at 0.02, which is pretty small. So let's just take the cup here and jump that up to, I'll just go 0.1. And that means that it's going to have a higher collision tolerance, and it's not going to penetrate through there. I could even have some fun and just give this a little bit more of some rotation, because the way things collide, they can collide by edge, they can collide by vertex, and they can collide by face. 3 different ways that things physically collide. So by rotating this, you're more likely, it's kind of, think about a fishnet, right? So the more edges, vertices, and faces collide with other vertices, edges, and faces, the better collision you're going to get. So hit rewind and hit play. And you see the process. Now it's even rolling around. Yeah, I'll play around a little bit more here with a little bit more bounciness, maybe some damping, maybe some more mass, just to get it to there, see? Now, by playing around a little bit more of that, you see I'm actually able to float in the cup, as if it's holding it, and I'm able to simulate that process of catching it in that cup. All right, this might be a good time to go ahead and save. Remember, save and save often. Let me just save scene as, and I'll just call this Catapult A. And it's automatically saving to the set project folder that I've already designated. All right, go ahead and spacebar here to get back to our side view. Because now what we need to do is we need to get the animation set up with keyframing of throwing this. Okay, so I'm going to basically hit play here to get it to simulate through until it's settled in the cup right about there. Okay, give it some time. See, it takes time. Now, I can actually tell this to start at that state. I can actually come here and say solver initial state set for selected, and that will mean the ball will start there rather than falling. But I kind of like it falling in and getting that natural movement. But let's go ahead now and let's actually make this throw the ball. Okay? So I know right about here is where the ball gets settled, right? Right about there, about 70 frames on my particular timeline. So I'm going to go and Control A to get my channel box here. You can see I'm going to rotate this value, which is the Y. And you see I've got a lot of information here that I probably want to freeze transformations. So you see when you select something and you freeze the transformations, I guess I should have done that before I should have frozen the transformation. So let's correct our error here. Okay? So I'm going to Shift P to unparent. Let's do Shift P. Now I can get it back here to my original setting and freeze transformations. Modify, freeze transformations, and you see it zeroes it out. You see it gives me an error. It won't let me freeze my catch cup because I need to edit, delete by type, rigid body to get it back to being a primitive. Now I can modify freeze transformations to zero it out. And this is kind of important to zero out your catch cup because we're going to have some issues if we need to change our keyframes around, because the rigid body, rigid bodies don't like animation. They don't like keyframing and movement because the real world is what's causing it to actually be animated. So by freezing it, now I can come back in, put the passive rigid body back on it, and let's go ahead and reparent it, and reparent it to this. So again, everything now in our channel box should be zeroed out, which it didn't do. Let's try once more. Delete by type, rigid body, modify, freeze transformation. See, now it's 0. And I'm actually going to do this too. Let's delete by type the history. And so that gets rid of all the past things that we added or removed. And let's put it back to being a passive. Parent. Okay, and now you see everything is zeroed out, zeroed out, zeroed out. And that's going to come in very, very handy later. So let's throw this ball. So I'm going to come here. Now I've got my auto key, which is next to the running man at the bottom right here, activated, so it'll auto key. But what I want to do here is key the values for the rotate. So I'm just going to come here, right-click, and key. To set a key there, let's add about 10 frames. Let's go, just like a thrower, right? We're going to go down a little bit to get some down action. And then we're going to rotate a throw. All right, now notice the ball stays there, and the ball is staying there because we're not doing interactive playback. Okay, now let's rewind. Now you see what happened there. You see how the parented cup got all messed up? Let's go to our perspective so we can see just how bad that got messed up. See that? It deformed the cup, and that's because it was parented and made a rigid before we added keyframes. Not a big deal, because I could literally take this, once again, delete by type, rigid body, that really did mess it up. Hold on a second. Let's go back a step before I actually did this, because for some reason it really messed it up. I don't like that. There we go. So I did the undo before I set that keyframe. Okay? Let's go ahead and remove the rigid body from our cup. You see here I can zero it out to get it back to where it belongs. And now let's go ahead and work with our keyframes. So let's go do that backwards. And then set the keyframe forward to throw the ball. Okay, so I've got the keyframe so you can see it now. Now the ball's just going to fall through. And you can see I've got the movement there to throw the ball. Now though, I need to add or reapply the passive rigid body after the fact. So you see there's an order to create these things so things don't get messed up. So let me come here, let's give it a little, and hit play. And it should catch the cup and throw it. Okay. Now, you can see it really didn't go that far. And that could be a combination of many things. That could be the bounciness or the mass of the ball or the cup. This could actually be how slow I actually threw it. Okay. So if I want to change these keys, okay, watch this. I'm going to make it throw a little faster. So I'm just going to go to the last key, cut, and just move it back about and paste that key. Okay, so it's just a faster throw. Problem is, you see, oops, it threw off the cup again. So this is one of those things you just got to be, aware of. Is undoing to get back to where I was. Before I made that, okay? So just remember that if you go back, so I went back several steps there to where I was to get that throwing process before we make that rigid. Let's go here. Again, we select the key, cut it, go back in time, paste that key, and now I can come here and go back and make this be a passive rigid body. So it's one of those things you just got to be careful of, because you always want to basically remove the rigid body by edit, delete by type rigid body if you're going to make any changes, because its relationship to movement is based upon that catapult. Now let's hit play. And because I moved that key, you can see now I'm throwing a lot farther. See that? All right. Now you see if I scrub through, it's not going to give me the proper. If you scrub through, it's not going to behave properly. You always want to have to rewind and hit play to get the proper simulation. And I'm going to hit pause when this ball hits the ground. There. Okay? Because what that's going to do now is showing me the distance that it's going. Now again, if I want to go further, I can play around with bounciness and so on. So let's go ahead and build a simple wall. Okay? Now to build the simple wall, go ahead, move this block up. I'm going to add a little bit of segmentation just to give more collidable elements and edges. I'm going to put this wall here. And you see, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build a wall out of these blocks. just like this. But what I don't want is I don't want this to be on the ground yet, because I need to simulate it falling so that it's an active rigid body on the ground. And that's where we're going to have to use that initial state. Okay, so let's go ahead and duplicate several of these. So you see, I'm not letting these touch. You don't want these to touch each other, and you don't want them on the ground. And what we've learned already is you also don't want these to be duplicated after they're already a rigid body. You've got to do it, the duplicates before. All right, so I've got, what, 5 little cubes here. Now to make these guys rigid, remember, all we really need to do is select them and add the gravity, or the window, relationship editor, dynamic relationships. See, I'll load them all up here, and I currently have 2 gravity fields, so I'll just give them one of them. I don't know why I've got 2. I must have deleted the prior one. And you see, by doing this, I have activated the gravity field to them, which means now they will act as rigid bodies. But what I have to do is hit play to get them to settle on the ground. See that? If I built them already on the ground, they may pass through the plane. You have to have the simulation fall. The solver needs to get the fall in. So we simulate it until they come to a standstill, right? But then I can come here, select them, fields and solvers, initial state, set for selected. So if I rewind, they now are starting on the ground. Okay, their initial state is on the ground. Now let's see here. Let's get back here and let's hit play. Okay, you see it's flying through the air. Is it going to get to them? Is it going to hit them? Oh, and you see it hit them. Now my problem, of course, is taking a little bit too long to get there. And you notice every time I hit play, it's doing a different simulation. So this kind of, it gets affected every time you do this, because sometimes it's making it there, sometimes it's not. This is where we can't really trust what we see in the playback, because it's having to simulate all this. This is where the Playblast comes in handy. So I'll just do a Playblast so I can see the real performance in real time. And you can see there that it's not even really making the wall. Let's look at the Playblast. Because the Playblast is going to be what renders. The Playblast is the real performance, not necessarily what happens inside your computers. And you see, I'm not even really making it there. So let's go back and let's make some changes to this, right? To try to get there faster and to get there and actually collide with our wall. Let's select the ball. Let's increase its mass, and let's maybe increase its bounciness, maybe increase its dynamic friction. Because every time you make changes to that, it's going to affect how it sticks to the cup. It's going to affect how it flies through the air. There, see, that one looked pretty good. But you're also noticing I'm running out of time. Remember, we can always add 100 more frames. So now we're at 400. And let's do another Playblast to see what it would really look like. And I just overwrite the video, the Playblast video, because I probably have it on save to file. See, that time it went over. So again, you're going to get different performances every little tweak and every time you hit play, or you have to simulate it through. That's why it's kind of like a video game playing with rigid dynamics, is because you're trying to hit targets. So you see it went over the wall. Well, there's a couple things I can do to actually remediate that, right? The easiest thing to do would be, let's go ahead, hit rewind. Let's make our floor bigger. Let's move our wall back. Okay, and let's go now and do another Playblast. Again, just overwriting because I have it on save. It wants to save these Playblasts. So I'm just going to overwrite it. So again, whoa. And you see, I can't even see let's see, did it hit it? Yeah, see it hit the wall there. I'm getting an awful lot of height is what I'm getting. Oh, you see why? It's because it was mid-bounce. So instead of just throwing it, it's actually acting like a baseball bat. It's hitting it. But you see the performance hitting balls, hitting the blocks. Let's play with it a little bit more. Let's actually turn the bounciness off here, made of the cup itself. Do another Playblast, overwrite to get the reaction. And because of that now, it's not going nearly as high in the air, and it is in fact hitting the ball just perfect. So I've got it looking really good there. Watch now. See, it's less bounce in the cup, and it's actually hitting our target. I like that. Now again, I can play with the weight and the mass of my blocks to actually have it affect it even different. You know, I can add more interesting little things to this as I go, but for the most part, this is all we really need for our catapult. Now I can go in and I could add lights. You know, I can add and activate textures. Let's go ahead and just add some ambient occlusion there, which is that little button next to the blue one. And now you'll get some more, you know, neat little shadow effects just to make the Playblast look nicer. It is going through the floor a little bit here, which is not a big deal. It actually hit the top and kind of bounced off. You remember now, I'm hitting play in the software here to hitting the playback. It's going to be totally different if and when we go and do a Playblast or a render. That's the true performance. Now again, if I want to add some simple shaders or lights, let's go ahead and add some lights. Create, lights, I'll put spotlight. And again, I can go and look through that light to arrange it, or my favorite one is actually hitting the T tool. T, or the toggle tool, allows me to move and navigate my light with a target. Let's go ahead and turn on the lights. And I can change the cone angle. I can change the penumbra to soften the ends there. I could give it a color. Okay, so I have a spotlight. Maybe I'll put a point light to create a backlight on the back side here. You notice here that again, I got shadows. I can do depth map, or I can do ray trace, which is on by default. Let's give this just a little bit of coolness. And third lights typically is, so I have a key light, which is my spotlight. That's my main light. I've got a backlight, which is acting as my point. And let's go ahead and add a directional light. And these are all, of course, software-driven lights. They're not the Arnold lights. Let me turn that intensity down. And now we can see it. Now remember, the playback is not going to be real time or accurate. That's only in the Playblast or in the render. Move that back just a little more, just because it looks better. Go ahead and turn off our wireframe on here. If we want to add some basic shaders or textures, I can come here. Now remember, we learned last week that we've got some different values here to add color and texture and shaders, but never touch these. Remember, because the Lambert one is what all geometry created as texture. And these are going to be, again, not Arnold textures, but basic software. So let's go ahead and create a blend. And I'll give it a color. Okay. Let's go ahead and make our floor be that blend. So I select the floor, right-click, assign material, and that now made it that color. Let's create another blend here. Let's make that be like a blue, and I will designate the colors of my blocks to be blue. Let's go ahead and make our catapult blue. And last, let's add a blend. And this will be for our ball. And our ball, in order to see it rotate, I'm going to hit the option box for the color and choose a checker. That would just mean that my ball now will have a little bit more visible texture to it all that we'll see when we activate the maps. See? And we'll be able to see it rolling and tumbling because of that checker that's applied to it. Now again, this is not the real world, we're just seeing what it looks like at now. Okay. Turn on shadows. Now we got shadows. We can see the shadows for the Playblast. Turn on even motion blur here to see what motion blur looks like. Whoops, looks like it wants me to stop and rewind. I hope I didn't just... See, this is all very taxing on your computer when you start adding all this stuff. And I've got my little stack of coins that are saying, stop, you're killing me. There we go. So with all these activated now I can do a simple, quick little Playblast. And this might be a good time here in the Playblast settings to actually go and set up our render settings now, because you can see it's going by the render settings, but I don't know what those settings are. So come to the render options. Okay, under Maya Software Common, we can give it a name. We can choose, and when we go to render it, to be target sequence. We can change the frame amount to be name_number, which is name_number is the preferred settings for doing a sequence. Start frame, end frame. I know my end frame is not 10 frames, it's actually now 400. Okay, by frame 1, I'm doing the perspective camera, yes, but here you see it's currently default is HD 540, which is kind of not known. Just change it to HD 1080. Okay, resolution 72, everything looks good. Then I can come over to the Maya Software section here and change this to be like high quality instead of just low quality. I could come here, turn on ray tracing, which are reflections and refractions. I can come here and turn on the motion blur. Okay, and hit close. So now I've set the render settings, so I can let now the AVI QuickTime render use those render settings. I can give it a file name here. I'll call this Catapult Playblast _Playblast. It knows already to go to the proper folder of the movie folder because I already set project, and we hit Playblast. And let's see how this actually works. Now sometimes the Playblast appears on here, but when it's using a lot of RAM, it actually, you can see it's slowing down as it's building a high quality Playblast. Not a render, but a high quality Playblast. And because it's having to take now into account motion blur, it's having to take in ray tracing, it's having to take in account of the high quality reflections and shadows and so on, the Playblast is very slow. And that's simply because I activated all these visible buttons here to give me the highest possible on-screen or RAM preview you can see here of what I'm doing. So we're just going to let that Playblast through. You can see my progress down here at the bottom. And it should start to animate now, the catch cup. And it's still going through the floor. Again, not that big of a deal there. But now you see the motion blur in action, which is pretty cool. Oh, look, I actually got a shadow of the ball on the wall. Gonna let this simulate through. So we're going to let this pause. I'm going to pause this video right here for a second and let this chug through and come back to it in a second. All right. Well, you see here, the Playblast is about to finish up. It took a little bit of time because of all these options, but let's see it play back in real speed. And again, you're welcome to submit this as Playblast. Here it comes. And you see it in real time now, and it looks pretty good. See that? Totally different in real speed. Real-time playback. Now, it only hit the one cube here. Now remember, I can add bounciness to these cubes. I can change their mass and make them lighter weight, so they actually go flying a little more. But again, this Catapult Playblast could be turned in as your assignment, or go back to rewind here. We can render it out. So what I'm going to do here, watch this. Let's make these cubes in the back here, under their rigid bodies. Let's make them bouncier. Let's give this top one more mass. These lower ones less mass, so that we get a little more flying through the air effect. All right, so we save. Just Control S to save. Now, if I want to render this out to actually get a rendered version of this all, don't forget, we almost always want to use our camera setting and turn on the film gate. And the film gate shows us exactly what is in the shot. So I can come in here now and set this up just a little bit better. Oops. Now I'm getting a lot of lag here, so let me go ahead and turn these visible cues off. I don't need to see them all. I don't even need to see lighting here, because that'll apply when I render it. And you see now I get a much faster performance. And now it's time to render this out. So again, to render it out, all I got to do is switch over here to the rendering settings, go up to the top, under render, and do a batch render. And it's going to start rendering in the background. And then I can take it into After Effects, put the sequence together, and actually give myself an MPEG-4 video. Now remember, Playblasts are uncompressed AVIs, guys. So if you're going to submit that uncompressed AVI, it's going to be probably close to, it could be close to a gigabyte, which is too large. So make sure you take it to After Effects and you save it as an MPEG-4. You could do that in After Effects, you could do that in Premiere, you can do that in Media Encoder. And just save it as an H.264 MPEG-4, which is a much smaller, higher compression rate to see. You can even simulate here inside Maya. You can view the sequence that's currently rendering while it's rendering. See what you actually, the final render. And you see how pretty the final render actually looks compared to the Playblast. That's it.